History has a ridiculous habit of giving full careers, monuments, holidays, and fan bases to people who may have never existed. Some were propaganda. Some were marketing. Some were legends that got promoted to history because everyone liked the story too much to check the receipt. Today, we're looking at 32 historical figures who might be famous ghosts wearing very convincing costumes. 1. Ned Lud sounds like exactly the kind of rebel leader factory owners would have nightmares about. Mysterious, invisible, and apparently very committed to smashing expensive machinery. In early 19th century England, textile workers watched new machines threaten their jobs, their wages, and basically their entire future. So the Luddites broke into workshops at night, destroyed frames and looms, and sent threatening letters signed by Ned Lud, or General Lud. Authorities imagined some shadowy mastermind coordinating the chaos. Very dramatic, very convenient, also probably completely fake. Ned Lud was almost certainly an invented figurehead, a fictional boss created so the movement could have a name without giving police a real leader to arrest. Some stories connect him to an apprentice named Ned Ludlam, but even that origin feels like legend wearing a cheap disguise. The authorities hunted a revolutionary who lived rent-free in the imagination. General Lud won by not existing. 2. Mulan is one of the most beloved warrior women in world culture. Loyal daughter, fearless soldier, legendary disguise artist, and later Disney royalty with excellent brand recognition. But historically, she is standing on ground so thin you can hear it crack. Her story comes from the Chinese Ballad of Mulan, usually dated around the 5th or 6th century. It tells of a young woman who takes her elderly father's place in the army by dressing as a man, fighting for years, and then returning home without asking for fame. It is a beautiful story. The problem is that a poem is not a military record. Chinese imperial archives were famously serious about documentation, yet they give us no confirmed Mulan, no enlistment record, no family proof, no official mention. She may represent an ideal, not an individual. Still powerful? Absolutely. Historically proven? Not even close. Mulan may be less forgotten soldier and more perfect folk heroine who refused to stay inside fiction. 3. The Queen of Sheba enters history like a royal mystery wrapped in gold. A powerful monarch, a long journey, exotic gifts, riddles, and a meeting with King Solomon, the ancient world's favorite wisdom machine. She appears in the Bible, the Quran, and Ethiopian tradition, where the story grows even bigger. In Ethiopia, she is linked to Solomon through a son, Menelik, who supposedly founded a royal dynasty. That is not just a legend. That is a whole national identity engine. But archaeologists have not found clear evidence for this specific queen. Sheba may refer to the Sabaean kingdom in Yemen, which was real and wealthy, but no surviving record points to a queen matching the famous story. She could be based on a real ruler whose documents vanished. She could also be a literary symbol designed to show how far Solomon's fame reached. Either way, one of history's most famous women still floats between throne room and metaphor. 4. Prester John was the medieval Christian king Europe desperately wanted, which already tells you something suspicious is happening. During the Crusades, stories spread about a mighty Christian ruler somewhere in the East, either in Asia or Africa, commanding a wealthy kingdom packed with wonders. European Christians imagined him as the ultimate backup plan, a powerful ally who would appear from beyond the known world and help defeat Muslim forces. Then a famous letter supposedly written by Prester John circulated in the 12th century, describing his magical kingdom with almost suspicious enthusiasm. Popes sent envoys, explorers chased rumors, Portuguese expeditions searched Africa for generations. And every time, Prester John remained just out of reach, mostly because he was almost certainly never there. The letter was probably a forgery, medieval propaganda dressed as diplomacy. A fictional king helped inspire real exploration. Imagine being fake and still accidentally influencing world geography. 5. Lycurgus was supposedly the grand architect of Sparta, the man who looked at ordinary society and said, "What if childhood was a military training program and comfort was morally suspicious?" Ancient tradition credited him with creating Sparta's famous institutions, the agage, the communal mess halls, the strict equality among male citizens, and the brutal discipline that made Sparta legendary. But even ancient Greeks could not agree when Lycurgus lived. Their guesses stretched across centuries, which is not exactly the sign of a well-documented biography. Modern historians are deeply skeptical that one man designed Sparta like some ancient social engineer with a clipboard. More likely, Sparta created Lycurgus as a sacred founder figure. If someone questioned the system, leaders could say, "No reforms, sorry, Lycurgus made it this way." Very convenient. He may have been less a real lawgiver and more a political lock on the door of change. 6. Aesop is the supposed author behind a mountain of fables where animals talk, behave badly, and somehow explain human stupidity better than actual humans do. The tortoise and the hare, the boy who cried wolf, the fox and the grapes, all of them get filed under Aesop, like he was running a one-man moral lesson factory in ancient Greece. Tradition says he was a Greek slave around 600 BC, but his biography is a wild pile of contradictions. Some stories say he was ugly, some say he was mute before receiving speech, and some claim he was executed by being thrown off a cliff by angry Delphians. That sounds less like history and more like folklore doing parkour. Many fables attributed to him come from different cultures and may be older than he supposedly was. Aesop probably became a convenient brand name for scattered folk wisdom. The man who taught the world through fables may himself be the biggest fable in the collection. 7. Confucius probably existed, which is already more than we can say for some people on this list. There was likely a teacher named Confucius living in ancient China around 500 BC, and he probably had students, ideas, and a reputation. But the Confucius most people picture, the flawless sage producing perfect wisdom on demand like a human fortune cookie machine, is much harder to separate from legend. The Analects, the main collection of his sayings, was compiled by followers after his death, and scholars still debate how much of it reflects his actual words. Over time, his image became cleaner, grander, and more untouchable. By the Han Dynasty, Confucius had become almost semi-sacred. The perfect moral teacher, the wise ancestor of civilization, the man who apparently never had an awkward sentence in his life. The real teacher may be buried beneath centuries of reverence. He existed, probably. But the myth got promoted to management. 8. Laozi is credited as the founder of Taoism and the author of the Tao Te Ching, one of the most influential philosophical texts ever written. The only tiny problem is that Laozi basically means old master or old teacher. That is not a personal name. That is what you call someone when you respect him deeply, forgot what his mother called him, or are writing legend instead of biography. Chinese historians have debated his existence for centuries. Some accounts place him as a contemporary of Confucius, but those accounts were written much later and are full of legendary decoration. Some scholars think there was a real thinker behind the name. Others believe the Tao Te Ching is a compilation of wisdom from multiple authors, later gathered under one convenient mystical label. And honestly, a founder who may dissolve into anonymity is strangely perfect for Taoism. The master who cannot be pinned down may have been unnamed for a reason. 9. Jack the Ripper is remembered as the ultimate Victorian nightmare. Foggy London streets, Whitechapel alleys, terrifying murders, and a killer with a name sharp enough to sell newspapers. The murders were tragically real. Several women were killed in 1888, and the fear that gripped London was not imaginary. But Jack the Ripper, as a character, may have been created by the media. The famous name came from a letter sent to a news agency, and police suspected even at the time that it was probably a hoax. Victorian newspapers were locked in brutal circulation wars, and a mysterious villain with a catchy nickname was basically front-page gold. The press turned horrific crimes into a marketable monster. The real killer may have been ordinary, nameless, or even not responsible for every murder later connected to him. Jack became the first true crime brand. Part criminal investigation, part public panic, part newspaper marketing campaign with blood on the ink. 10. Sun Tzu is the legendary author of The Art of War, the ancient strategy book quoted by generals, CEOs, athletes, and that one guy in every meeting who thinks saying, "Know your enemy," counts as a business plan. Traditional accounts say Sun Tzu was a general serving the king of Wu around 500 BC. The problem is that contemporary records from that period do not clearly mention him, which is awkward for someone supposedly that important. His first major biography appears centuries later and includes legendary details that make historians start adjusting their glasses. Many scholars think The Art of War may not be the work of one brilliant commander at all. It could be a compilation of military wisdom built over generations by multiple Chinese strategists. The name Sun Tzu may have been attached later to give the text authority. So every time someone dramatically quotes him, they might be quoting an ancient committee, which makes the office meeting even worse. 11. Saint Christopher is the patron saint of travelers, the holy figure whose metal has protected countless dashboards, backpacks, and anxious road trips. Medieval stories described him as a giant who carried the Christ child across a dangerous river. That version is already dramatic enough, but some Eastern traditions went completely off-road and described Christopher as having the head of a dog. Yes, a dog-headed saint. Medieval Christianity sometimes looked at weird and said, "Make it sacred." The historical problem is that evidence for Christopher is basically smoke in a candlelit room. There is no solid proof that he existed as a real martyr. In 1969, the Vatican removed him from the general Roman calendar, which was not exactly shouting fake, but it was definitely the church quietly backing away from the biography. Millions still honor him anyway. Saint Christopher lives in that strange space where devotion keeps walking even after history loses the map. 12. Ragnar Lodbrok is the Viking legend built for maximum drama. Fearless raider, snake pit victim, father of terrifying sons, and the kind of warrior who sounds like he was invented by someone trying to sell axes. Modern television made him feel almost historical, but the original sources are a tangled saga mess. Ragnar is credited with exploits spread across different decades and regions, sometimes in ways that cannot comfortably fit into one human life. One tradition links him with the famous raid on Paris in 845. Other stories place his death in England on a timeline that refuses to behave. Historians often suspect Ragnar is a composite figure, stitched together from several Viking leaders whose legends fused over time. His supposed sons, like Ivar the Boneless and Bjorn Ironside, probably have stronger historical footing than he does. Ragnar may not be one man. He may be the Viking version of a greatest hits album with a beard. 13. Homer is credited with creating the Iliad and the Odyssey, two works so important that Western literature basically keeps them in the family Bible. The classic image is irresistible: a blind poet wandering ancient Greece, reciting enormous epics from memory while everyone sits around pretending they are not confused by the genealogy. But the Homeric question has tortured scholars for centuries. Did one man compose both poems? Did Homer write anything? Did Homer even exist? The poems show signs of oral tradition, repeated formulas, and layers of material shaped over many generations. Some sections may have older roots than others. Many scholars think Homer may represent not one poet, but a tradition of singers who refined these stories over centuries. Ancient audiences liked having a genius attached to masterpieces because anonymous cultural process is terrible branding. So Homer may be a mask worn by generations of storytellers. One man got the credit. A whole tradition did the heavy lifting. 14. Pope Joan is one of those medieval legends that sounds like church gossip after 3 cups of wine. According to the story, a brilliant woman disguised herself as a man, climbed the church hierarchy, and became pope sometime around the 9th century. Her secret was supposedly exposed when she gave birth during a public procession in Rome, which is not exactly a subtle plot twist. The Catholic Church has always denied the story, and historians mostly agree there is no contemporary evidence for her. The papal records from the period do not leave a clear gap where Joan could comfortably sit on the throne. But the legend survived for centuries, and plenty of medieval people believed it. Stories even grew about a special chair used to verify that future popes were male, though the chair's real purpose was likely ceremonial. Pope Joan is almost certainly fiction, but fiction with sharp teeth. She reveals medieval fears about women, authority, and institutional humiliation. 15. William Shakespeare absolutely existed as a man from Stratford-upon-Avon, but for centuries some people have insisted that this man could not possibly have written Shakespeare's plays. The anti-Stratfordian theory argues that the real author must have been someone more educated, more aristocratic, and more socially impressive, like Francis Bacon, Christopher Marlowe, or the Earl of Oxford. The argument usually sounds like this. How could a grammar school boy from a provincial town understand law, courts, politics, and high society so well? Mainstream scholars are not impressed. Elizabethan grammar schools were demanding. The theater world explains much of Shakespeare's practical knowledge, and the plays contain enough mistakes about aristocratic life to suggest the author was not secretly one of them. But the conspiracy refuses to die because it offends people that genius might come from somewhere ordinary. Apparently, the greatest writer in English being a small-town professional actor is just too rude to class snobbery. 16. Saint Valentine is supposedly the patron saint of love, which is why every February people buy roses, chocolate, and cards written in the emotional style of a nervous teenager with a coupon. But the actual Valentine behind the holiday is a historical traffic jam. The Catholic tradition includes several martyrs named Valentine or Valentinus, all connected to ancient Rome in vague and overlapping ways. One may have been a priest, another may have been a bishop, another is barely more than a name. None of their early stories are especially romantic. The love connection appears much later, especially with Geoffrey Chaucer in the 14th century, when Valentine's Day became linked to birds choosing mates. Yes, birds. That is the romantic foundation under the billion-dollar heart-shaped industry. In 1969, the Church removed Valentine from the general Roman calendar because the evidence was uncertain. So the Saint of Love may be a blur of martyrs, poetry, and bird dating season. Very romantic, very suspicious. 17. Marco Polo's travel book helped shape Europe's imagination of Asia and inspired explorers for centuries. Christopher Columbus carried a copy, which is both historically important and slightly alarming, considering how that turned out. Polo claimed to have reached China and served at the court of Kublai Khan. But some historians have argued he may never have made it there. His book leaves out details that seem strange to modern readers: tea, chopsticks, Chinese writing, foot binding, and the Great Wall. That is a lot of major cultural scenery to miss, unless your travel guide was written from very far away. Some scholars suggest he may have traveled only as far as Persia or the eastern trade routes, collecting stories from merchants who had actually been deeper into Asia. Defenders argue that his descriptions of Mongol administration and trade are too accurate to dismiss. So Marco Polo may be a legendary traveler or history's most confident second-hand storyteller. Either way, the man knew how to sell a journey. 18. Robin Hood is England's favorite outlaw, the archer in green, the enemy of corrupt officials, the guy who robbed the rich and redistributed wealth before anyone invented tax policy with better branding. But finding the real Robin Hood is like trying to catch smoke in Sherwood Forest. Medieval references to names like Robin Hood or Robin Hood exist, but they are vague, contradictory, and scattered. Some traditions place him in the 12th century, others in the 14th. Some put him in Sherwood Forest, others in Barnesdale. Early ballads do not even include some of the most famous characters like Maid Marian and Friar Tuck. Most historians believe Robin Hood is a composite figure built from outlaws, poachers, rebels, and peasant fantasies of justice. He became a symbol for everyone who wanted corrupt power, embarrassed in public. Robin Hood probably was not one man. He was a wish with a bow, and that is why he never dies. 19. Uncle Sam looks like the United States turned into a strict elderly man who wants you specifically, and apparently has strong feelings about patriotic hats. The familiar legend says he was based on Samuel Wilson, a meatpacker from Troy, New York, who supplied barrels of beef to the U.S. Army during the War of 1812. The barrels were stamped U.S., Soldiers supposedly joked that it meant Uncle Sam, and a national symbol was born. Lovely story, also not very clean. The phrase Uncle Sam appears in print before Wilson's connection became famous, and the character's appearance developed slowly through cartoons, posters, and artists. The most iconic version, James Montgomery Flagg's World War I recruitment poster, used Flagg himself as a model. So Uncle Sam is not simply one man. He is a government-flavored meme, assembled from jokes, wartime propaganda, artistic choices, and retroactive legend. America's favorite uncle may be a committee with facial hair. 20. Helen of Troy supposedly had the face that launched 1,000 ships, which is a poetic way of saying the ancient Greeks blamed an entire war on one woman being unbelievably attractive. The Trojan War may have a real historical core. Archaeology suggests Troy existed, and conflict in that region around the Late Bronze Age is plausible. But Helen herself is much harder to defend as a real person. Wars are usually fought over trade, territory, access, prestige, and power, not because one prince made an extremely bad romantic decision, but "we fought over control of trade routes near the Dardanelles" does not exactly make a poet's heart explode. "We fought because the most beautiful woman in the world was taken" is much better storytelling. Helen may be a symbol of Troy's wealth and desirability, a human face placed on political and economic conflict. The face that launched 1,000 ships might have been a shipping route with good public relations. 21. Tokyo Rose was imagined by American troops during World War II as a seductive enemy voice broadcasting Japanese propaganda across the Pacific. She supposedly played American music, mocked US soldiers, and tried to weaken morale. The problem is that Tokyo Rose was not one woman. It was a nickname American servicemen gave to multiple English-speaking women working on Japanese radio broadcasts. But after the war, the US government wanted a single villain, because bureaucracy loves a simple target almost as much as the public loves a dramatic story. So blame landed on Eva Toguri, an American citizen trapped in Japan during the war. She was convicted of treason despite weak evidence and served 6 years in prison. Decades later, key witnesses admitted they had been pressured to lie, and she was pardoned in 1977. Tokyo Rose was a collective wartime myth turned into one woman's punishment. A fictional villain got a real person sent to prison. 22. Pythagoras is the triangle man, the name attached to the theorem that has stalked students through math class for generations. But the real Pythagoras, if there was one, is buried under a pile of mysticism, cult behavior, and suspiciously late sources. He supposedly founded a secretive community in ancient Greece that treated numbers as sacred, believed in reincarnation, followed strange rules, and had a famously intense problem with beans. Some later accounts claim they avoided beans because beans were connected to souls, which is exactly the kind of detail that makes geometry suddenly feel haunted. Pythagoras himself left no writings. Almost everything we know comes from followers and later authors writing long after him. The famous theorem was known in Babylon long before he lived. He may have been a real teacher, but the genius math prophet version is probably heavily mythologized. You may have spent school years blaming a mascot for a bean-fearing number cult. 23. Romulus is Rome's founding myth in full dramatic costume. Abandoned baby, twin brother, wolf nurse, divine ancestry from Mars, violent rivalry, city foundation, and then, because Rome was never subtle, brother murder. According to legend, Romulus killed Remus and founded Rome in 753 BC. Great story. Very cinematic. Historically, though, Rome did not pop into existence because one angry twin drew a boundary line and got sensitive about it. Archaeology shows the site developed gradually from earlier settlements over generations. Romulus was likely created to give Rome a heroic origin story, one packed with symbols Romans loved: divine favor, toughness, destiny, and violence that somehow becomes patriotic when narrated properly. The fratricide also told Romans something uncomfortable but useful about themselves. If the city began with brother killing brother, then expansion and conflict could be framed as part of Rome's nature. Romulus may not be a founder. He may be propaganda with a sword and a wolf. 24. Paul Bunyan feels like he should be ancient American folklore. A giant lumberjack, a blue ox named Babe, forests flattened in a morning, and stories big enough to need their own zip code. But the Paul Bunyan most people know is much more modern and much more commercial. There were some earlier logging camp tales about a figure named Paul Bunyan, but the famous version, with gigantic size, Babe the Blue Ox, and impossible feats, was popularized in 1916 by advertising writer William Lawhead for the Red River Lumber Company. Yes, America's legendary lumber hero became famous through a lumber ad campaign. That is so American, it should come with a coupon. The campaign worked so well that people started treating Paul as authentic, deep folklore, and even scholars studied him that way before the marketing routes became clearer. He is not entirely fake, but he is definitely part corporate mascot. Basically Betty Crocker in flannel, but with more axes. 25. Euclid is known as the father of geometry, which sounds extremely official for a man whose personal life is basically a locked room with no windows. His Elements became one of the most influential textbooks ever written, shaping mathematics for over 2,000 years. But Euclid himself is nearly invisible. We do not know when he was born, when he died, what he looked like, who taught him, or much about his life at all. The few anecdotes we have were written much later and may be fiction. Some historians think Euclid was a real mathematician working in Alexandria. Others have suggested the name might represent a school, a team, or a collected tradition of mathematicians organizing existing knowledge into one elegant system. Elements includes material developed before Euclid, arranged with extraordinary clarity. So the most famous geometry teacher in history may have been one man, or a brilliant editorial brand. Imagine being haunted by proofs from what might be an ancient math department. 26. John Henry is the steel-driving man, the folk hero who raced a steam drill, beat the machine, and died with his hammer in his hand. It is one of the most powerful American labor legends ever told. Human strength against industrial replacement, pride against automation, muscle against metal. But the real John Henry is frustratingly hard to find. Railroad companies kept records, including accidents and deaths, yet no clear historical John Henry perfectly matches the legend. Scholars have searched for more than a century and produced theories, candidates, and maybes, but no final answer. He might have been based on a real black railroad worker or several workers whose stories fused together. He might also be pure folklore, created to express workers' fear of machines replacing them. John Henry may not need a birth certificate to matter. He became the voice of every person staring at new technology and wondering if tomorrow still had room for them. 27. Baron Munchausen is a rare case where a real person existed, but the fictional version ate him alive. The original was Carl Friedrich Hieronymus, Freiherr von Munchausen, an 18th-century German nobleman who served in the Russian military and apparently enjoyed telling exaggerated stories about his adventures. Then, writer Rudolf Erich Raspe took that reputation and turned it into comedy legend in 1785. The fictional Baron rides cannonballs, travels to the moon, and pulls himself out of a swamp by his own hair, which is physically impossible but emotionally very confident. The stories became popular across Europe, and the real Munchausen hated it. His name became associated with absurd lies, and his reputation was basically kidnapped by literature. Today, almost nobody remembers the actual veteran. They remember the impossible cartoon liar. Fiction did not just overshadow reality here. It shoved reality into a closet and started signing autographs under its name. 28. William Tell is Switzerland's legendary crossbow hero, the man forced by a tyrannical Austrian governor to shoot an apple off his son's head. One wrong move, and the story becomes a national tragedy with fruit. Tell makes the perfect symbol. Brave father, calm marksman, enemy of oppression, professional apple problem solver. But historians have a serious issue with him. The same apple shooting motif appears in older Norse and Germanic legends long before William Tell's supposed lifetime. That suggests Switzerland did not so much document a hero as adopt a traveling folk story and dress it in national colors. There is no contemporary evidence for Tell, and he appears in written sources around 150 years after the alleged events. Many Swiss historians treat him as legendary, but founding myths are not designed to pass a courtroom test. They are designed to make a nation feel ancient, brave, and destined. Tell may be borrowed folklore, but he hit the symbolic target perfectly. 29. Betty Crocker may be the most emotionally successful imaginary woman in American history. For decades, people wrote to her for cooking advice, trusted her recipes, and even sent marriage proposals, which is a bold move considering she was a corporate invention with excellent penmanship. Betty was created in 1921 by the Washburn-Crosby Company, which later became part of General Mills. The company needed a friendly female name to answer customer questions because apparently Dear Flour Corporation did not feel warm enough. Crocker came from a retired company director, and Betty sounded friendly and approachable. Her signature was chosen through a contest among female employees. Her portrait has been redesigned repeatedly to keep her looking modern, like a brand mascot with eternal youth and frosting-based immortality. Millions treated her like a real domestic expert. Betty Crocker is not a woman. She is corporate trust baked at 350 degrees until golden brown. 30. King Arthur is the ultimate British legend. Camelot, Excalibur, the Round Table, noble knights, tragic romance, and enough medieval atmosphere to keep tourism alive forever. But the historical Arthur is almost impossible to locate. The earliest references are vague Welsh poems and later histories written long after he supposedly lived. There is no contemporary record clearly identifying him as the Great King of Britain. Many historians think Arthur may be a composite of several post-Roman war leaders who fought the Saxons. Others think he may be mostly myth, expanded by storytellers over centuries. The famous pieces arrived gradually. Lancelot was added by French Romance writers. The Round Table developed later. Merlin grew from Welsh legend and literary imagination. Camelot itself became more elaborate with every retelling. Arthur is basically a medieval shared universe built before anyone invented movie franchises. The real Arthur may have been one man, several men, or one excellent story that refused to stay small. 31. George P. Burdell is the fictional person with a better academic and military career than most real humans manage with a pulse. In 1927, Georgia Tech student William Edgar Smith accidentally received 2 enrollment forms. Instead of returning the extra one, he did what any bored legend in the making would do. He invented George P. Burdell and enrolled him. Then the prank escaped containment. Smith and his friends completed assignments for George, took exams for him, and somehow George earned a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. During World War II, his name appeared in military paperwork, and he was jokingly credited with more than 50 combat missions. Later, George popped up in magazines, voting campaigns, online profiles, and campus lore. Georgia Tech eventually embraced him as a beloved tradition. He began as a clerical prank and became a century-long institutional ghost. Honestly, George P. Burdell has better networking skills than most graduates. 32. Ossian was presented as an ancient Scottish bard, a kind of Celtic Homer whose epic poems had supposedly survived from a heroic old world. In the 1760s, James Macpherson published what he claimed were translations of Ossian's works, and Europe completely lost its mind. Napoleon admired them, Goethe loved them, Thomas Jefferson praised them. Romantic writers treated the poems as a misty portal into authentic Celtic antiquity, full of melancholy heroes, wild landscapes, and ancient grandeur. But critics asked an obvious and very rude question. Where were the original texts? Macpherson could never produce convincing originals because the poems were largely his own creations, not true translations of ancient epics. He insisted they were genuine until his death, which is commitment, if not honesty. Ossian influenced literature, nationalism, and European ideas about Celtic culture, while possibly being one of the biggest poetic frauds of the 18th century. The ancient bard was probably Macpherson in a very dramatic costume. So now the real fight begins. Who on this list are you absolutely refusing to believe was fake? And who did we miss that deserves to be exposed next? Drop the name in the comments, but bring evidence because vibes are not archaeology. And if this video just ruined one of your favorite legends, hit like, subscribe, and stay close. History has plenty more fake celebrities to embarrass.